Hello, it's Amber. Real quick before we get into this episode of Tabletop Crowd, just a note, this episode was recorded back in November of 2021, so a few things have changed. If you listen to the full show, there's talk of Kickstarter and a timeline of January, and that has changed. So the project to change can now be found on GameFound, and of course there will be a link to it in the show notes. So that's just my note. Disclaimer as you listen. And now we can go on to Kristin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tabletop Crowd. I'm your host, Kristin. Tonight, I am here with two special guests, Ulysses and Ewen. They are the writers for the project To Change. So if we can start with introductions and then a little brief overview of what the project is. Ulysses, can we start with you?
Yeah, hey, I'm Ulysses Duckler. I'm mostly a full-time med student in the South and working towards a family practice eventually. But in my hobby and off time, I do TRPG design and development and writing. So that's been pretty fun. I've had one pretty successful Kickstarter, Cuticurium, which is all about anthropomorphic bugs. And so I figured I'd go into something else that I have a big interest in for my next project.
Hello, I'm Ewan. I am a geology student in the Midwest. I am a writer primarily. I met Duck through a writing project I've been working on, and we were talking, and he got around to the idea of this project, and it sounded like a lot of fun. So I've been collaborating with him on this.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to hear a little bit about this project To Change. So Ulysses, can you give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. So this is another indie TRPG game. It's very focused on transformation and metamorphosis. I didn't feel like there were enough TRPGs that could really emphasize that in a one shot or even for a campaign setting about characters who are going through a certain change, and maybe that has mental and physical aspects too. I think that can often be a small part of other games, but in this game, it is the main focus. It's all about what is happening to the characters, and it's also about giving the GM or the storyteller a lot of tools and able to sort of influence that, so they can almost play as their own character, as they are this force that is changing the players. And we also wanted to do something with tarot cards, because that's it's very popular right now too. And I really want to see one of our main artists, Militia, do a full tarot deck, or at least the major arcana. So the game is diceless, and you draw cards, you draw tarot cards to determine like the outcomes of different actions.
Very cool. So diceless, tarot card driven. I have so many questions. So talk to me a little bit about what's the setting? What's like the setting or the main theme other than the transformation, which I think is very cool.
So right now we're working with a bunch of different one shots, and hopefully the game will contain like a very fleshed out system to use. And then the book will contain a lot of different smaller stories that GMs can use and use as little one shots, or use as ideas for larger sessions. But there's not really a cohesive theme, though me and Ewan are starting with some of the first of those stories. But really the cohesiveness is in the system design, and then how GMs and players can experience that through a bit shorter games is what we're designing this for.
Yeah, it's really more that central theme of transformation, metamorphosis, that kind of thing. It's really applicable to a wide variety of different settings.
It is. And what I was expecting you to say is, this is about transformation set with a crew on a spaceship in space, right? But it sounds like you're really going to stay true to transformation or metamorphosis and write different one shots or stories. And it sounds like the settings then possibly could be endless, right? There's just like many different types of settings.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, I know we're planning to do a few ourselves, and we also have guest artists or guest writers and artists who are coming in to do other one shots with illustrations. That should be very fun.
Yeah, I've toyed around with space opera, secondary world fantasy, contemporary, all sorts of things.
So how does character creation work?
Character creation is pretty simple. You can choose one of the major arcana that sort of represents a character archetype of what kind of person this is in a bit more of a general sense. And then we're still working through a few of the details, but depending on what we call that, the face card, what sort of card you choose as your character, that influences what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and then what sort of things do they excel at when they get like a great success at any of the actions or the problem resolution mechanics. But in general, it's very easy, just picking one of the face cards that you feel fits with the character you had in mind. And we want it to be really pick up and play easy, so then a GM can easily lay down one of these one shots. Players can just choose from a simple idea they have for a character and then go from there.
Sorry, I'm thinking about all the characters I would create based off of art. So do you have one tarot deck that is going to be for all settings, or are you going to have different tarot decks?
So this deck, the game just uses the major arcana cards.
Okay.
So you don't need a whole deck, because we thought that's kind of it's kind of bulky a little bit. And just having the 22 cards allows for a lot more simplicity with how the drawing mechanic worked. So you don't have to shuffle an entire deck every time.
Makes sense.
Okay, so for the actual the art design itself, we're doing lots of different transformations, which is a really fun project as it's going through. Ewan helped contribute some of these, but I had a lot of them finished by the time she joined in. So it started with ideas like werewolves, of course, is a classic. Vampires, changing into demons, angels, all sorts of things. It goes the entire breadth of like transformation that's known from media, from myth, from books. We want to explore all of that and then reflect those in the types of one shots that you can do with this.
And how did you two, I know Ewan touched on it briefly, but have you two worked together before on previous projects, or is this your first time working together?
This is our first time working together. Ewan, do you want to talk about it? I mean, I mostly met her through her wonderful novelization that's in progress right now. Oh. And I was so impressed, and I became such a fanboy of it that I had to reach out. And then we had this shared interest, sort of based on some of the novelization's themes. And then Ewan started telling me about these other stories she was working on, too many even. And so I had this idea in mind that I was toying around with, and then we kind of smacked together and figured it out.
So Ewan, do you want to talk a little bit about the novel, or is that something you're not ready to share with the world?
It's called I'm Not an Evil Sorceress. It's fantasy, it's romance, the plot is basically there's this sorceress who is renowned for basically being a seductive dominatrix. And there's this princess, and she is in an arranged marriage, and she's engaged to someone she doesn't want to marry. And so she gets desperate and goes to the fair folk for help. And she ends up stumbling upon this sorceress, Phaedra, and she doesn't really feel that she can get away, so she makes a deal and gets a potion, and she isn't going to use it, but then she has a really bad day one day and decides, what, heck with it, I'm going to use it. I will say this much: it begins a complex, very intricate character connections, story of misunderstandings and comedy and drama. And as far as genre, I would essentially describe it as a sapphic harem fantasy romance. That's a pretty good summary of it, I think.
Yeah, and it leaves us with a little bit of a cliffhanger too, right? Because now I want to read it. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I like hearing about other projects. Did this book at all, or did the work that you did on the novel kind of inspire anything you're doing in this game, or is it a completely separate project and feeling, if that makes sense?
Well, they both kind of have themes of transformation. There's at least one card illustration that was very loosely inspired by the premise of.
Yes, one of the very first cards that we designed, actually.
Generally, I would say this is my first book. It's given me a lot of experience and practice with writing, and so it is definitely coloring my work on this game. In fact, I'm tempted, I haven't decided yet, but I'm halfway tempted to do a one-shot scenario in this setting, but I haven't decided on that yet.
And of course, she has so many ideas juggling around. I'm working on one, and then I'll get to the next one, and I'll get from there. Also, the game at the same time too.
I have like four novels right now that I am really anxious to start.
One at a time.
That's always the challenge, right? One project at a time.
Yeah.
So real quick, going back to the tarot cards. So I know that for the game, we're using the Major Arcana, which is 22. And you mentioned an artist. So can folks use a standard or the Major Arcana cards from a standard deck, or are you creating a custom deck for this game?
No, you can use any Major Arcana deck that you want. Yep. That makes it real easy and accessible. There will be, well, hopefully with the Kickstarter, there will be a printed Arcana deck that you can use, and it's going to look really awesome. So far, we just have seen some of the initial designs by the editor, and it looks amazing. Yeah, by the time this releases, all the initial card art should be finished. So it's going to look really beautiful. Yeah, Militia is wonderful. And when I was thinking about it a lot, I was thinking I really want to see her do an entire tarot card deck, or at least for the Major Arcana.
Mm-hmm. So it's one artist that's working on it?
Yeah. So it's going to have a very cohesive style, but in terms of what's presented, it's all over the place, which is, I think, really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it inspires your character choice. It makes me think of For the Queen and all the different queens you can have in that game and how that kind of inspires your story. So it reminds me of that in a very positive way. I really like the idea of using a card and art to help inspire your character choice.
Yeah.
What gave you the idea for this in the first place?
For my last game for Cuticurium, I really liked the idea of doing a TTRPG that focused on bugs and focused on like the smallest things. And then, of course, I want to use the smallest dice, D4s. It was a D4 system, which I felt was pretty funny.
It is.
Yeah, even now I still have a lot of D4 detractors, but I'm a big D4 supporter, so I'll step on them all day. And so that came from just being around a lot of people who really enjoy bugs too. And I worked with Escher Cattle, who's a great entomologist and had all this wonderful information, actually actual insight and knowledge on bugs and how they work, and then could translate to the game and also their wonderful art. And so for this, I feel like I've been around a lot of writers and artists who've been doing really cool stuff with elements of transformation, change, just kind of seeing a lot of work from trans artists too. And I really want to showcase a lot of that. Their art, their writing, the feelings that can be invoked there. So that's what I wanted the focus to be for this time. And then I got a wonderful writer to join in.
I really enjoy games that invoke a lot of emotion and or have relationships between characters. So I like that inspiration. Other than the two of you and your fantastic artist, do you have anyone else working on the project?
Yeah, we have a few people so far. I have the same editor who I brought in from Cuticurium, Blythe or HK or Valentine, he goes by a few names. He did excellent work there. So I wanted to have him do even more spotlight here. Also, a funny story, I'm having a few illustrations done by sort of an old RPG maker designer who I reached out to. I was very inspired by their work. And they just responded and said, "Hey." And so I said, I'll shoot my shot and say, "I love your art. Would you like to do a few illustrations for this? I think you'd be excellent for some ideas I had." And she said, "Yeah." So she's doing a few illustrations for that. I'm very excited to reveal some of those, but those will be sort of big spreads in the middle of the book.
Mm.
And then I had one other artist who I'd always want to work with before, was a great friend of mine, and I really love their style, Pog, and she is doing the cover, which looks amazing so far.
I can't wait to see it. Are you going to share any of it on Twitter or other mediums prior to the Kickstarter, or are you keeping it really close? I get guests who do both, right? So I always ask, because some people like to do big reveals during the Kickstarter and others kind of share along the way. And I'm always curious at what creators like processes for that.
I feel like I shared a little bit too much last time, and I had almost everything that was on the initial Kickstarter page was out at the time.
Sure.
So I'm gonna be sharing some, but I'm gonna withhold a little bit more too. Because I'm just really happy with it so far. But yeah, the cover, and right now we have half the cards done, and then by the time the episode airs, the other half will be done, I believe. We're saving a lot in our pockets.
So I know that the game that you made previously, Cuticurium, right?
Yeah.
Is different because you played bugs, but I asked Ewen about her novel. So could you give us a brief overview of Cuticurium? Because I feel like if folks haven't checked it out yet, maybe they want to.
Sure, and I'd love for them to do so. Right now you can still get it on itch.io on my game page. You can also buy the physical print copy on the IPR website, Indie Press Revolution. And for that game, we did it with this really big map that it was double-sided that showed different locations through the sort of insect world of the Cuticurium. And so that was like our extra accompanying feature. And so for this game, we're going with the Major Arcana deck instead. The map was delightful. Mel did that too. And it's so beautiful to see that fully done. So yeah, we ran that through Kickstarter. Turned out really well. We even got a lot of extra stretch goals. We were able to make a soundtrack for it, which was awesome.
Oh,
wow. I feel like that was kind of very selfish because I used the soundtrack almost exclusively. I was just listening to it all the time while I was writing the game. And so I've been really compelled to try and do a soundtrack for this one too. Maybe have like tracks for each of the different one-shot ideas to sort of set the mood for it when people are playing those. But we'll see, depending on stretch goals. I want to get more scenarios before we start doing music for them.
sure.
But I'd hopefully want to use the same artist because Yofty did a wonderful job on that. But the game is all about anthropomorphic bugs. Big focus on emotions there too. We wanted to sort of create a setting where bugs could explore what sort of having like a human civilization feels like. So an area where killing and violence are sort of prohibited, and it suppresses that aspect of the insect nature. So then there can be more growth, and a lot of the moves are focused on, well, we have one move that is exactly transformation, which is like cocooning or a bug changing their entire personality. So it was one of the interesting aspects there, and probably one that led me to think about this project a lot too when I was developing it. And so we took a lot of inspiration from Monster Hearts, from Powered by the Apocalypse games, but did a lot of things differently too. There were no move sets. Instead, you could just design your bug by mix and matching features, which sort of made it so you could play any type of bug imaginable, or even bugs that didn't exist, which was a cool sticking point that I had with Escher. Wanted to just showcase like all the wonderful things you can do with insects. This included crabs, snails, slugs, worms, anything that fall under creepy crawlies.
Nice. And it uses a D4 system, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to do that because I want to use the smallest dice for the smallest things.
Yeah.
And there is a D20, but only like big beasts like birds and lizards and things that would eat you, they get to use a D20. You have to use a D4.
You use the D4 all the time because
Right.
you're little. I like it. I'm guessing, but you must have designed the system yourself then versus using like a PBTA. This is your system.
It's similar in a lot of ways, but it's different in a lot more ways too. I really like to design my own systems. That's just how I like to roll. I have 2 other games I've done before.
Mm-hmm.
A game about lesbian nuns in a convent, which uses its own system entirely. And I did a game that was sort of Fate anime inspired. That one was more just basically a Powered by the Apocalypse hack.
Nice. I will not derail us by asking about lesbian nuns, but I might ask you after this recording's over because
it's a fun little thing. It wasn't a whole big project, but that was one of the games I initially started working with Militia as an artist. And so her work there was wonderful.
I want to play that sometime.
Right?
It actually, it turns out it plays a lot more like a board game because it's very like action management, but there's also a lot of elements where you have to role play to get things across because nuns aren't allowed to share some of their intentions or what they're trying to do.
Right.
So you have to do it very subtly in like discreet gestures. Otherwise you'll get called out for being shameless.
So to change, do you have a goal on how many scenarios you want to have in the game, or is that going to be somewhat dependent on like stretch goals and funding and that sort of thing?
I'd say slightly dependent on stretch goals. Also dependent on how crazy Ewen gets with developing a bunch of them now. Like I said, I'm going one at a time, but she's going crazy.
Fair. Ewen, how many are you working on right now? Can I ask?
At the moment, I'm actually just working on one, but I have ideas for a bunch more.
I'm finishing up one, and I'll probably work on hopefully at least 2 more to add. But yeah, like I said, we do have right now we have some funding too, so we'll be able to afford at least a few other extra writers and artists, and then hopefully with stretch goals, we can get even more. I'd like to get at least 8
different writers.
Yeah, but then hopefully more than that too.
Sure.
Or not 8 different writers, but at least 8 different modules. Yeah.
Understood.
We too are going to probably contribute at least half of those, I think.
Of course. I mean, if you're making the game and it's a project that's like near and dear to your heart, as it sounds it is, right? Transformation, then why not write some of the stories? I mean, it's always good to get other voices, but
definitely
it's also nice to be able to write something you're passionate about and that you have ideas about as well.
And with this project, I really want to showcase a lot of trans writers too. I'm cis myself, and so I feel like transformation is very near and dear to me, but to a lot of people, it's a much different experience. It's much more personal, much more of an intimate thing. So I want to have a lot more of those voices on board too.
So possibly 8 scenarios to start with. Of course, there could be more, which would be very exciting. What is like your favorite scenario that you've written so far, or what are you currently working on?
I think a lot of them for both of us are still in development, and some just ideas, but some ideas are very strong, and I definitely want to have them seen through fully. For myself, I have one idea about a sort of like a merfolk or mermaid transformation, and then as well as one that leans a bit more into the horror aspect with like a digital sort of fusion and glitching transformation of people being like an element of robotization or disintegrating. So there can be a lot of ways you can really focus on the body horror aspect of things, but there's also stories that some of the guest writers are working on that seem like entirely positive and full of self-affirmation.
The one I'm working on currently is actually kind of a revival of an old concept that was inspired by a dream. But it's a space opera alien transformation story. I won't say too much, but it's a story that I've toyed around with a lot, and And I frankly think it's perfectly suited to this system. So I'm very happy I have the opportunity to share it in that form. As for other things I've considered, they really run the gamut. Like I said, I was thinking about doing one in the setting of my current work, maybe something to do with dragons. I'm not certain. I want to do something with vampires.
Hell yes.
Big fan of vampire fiction. I really kind of want to do a space opera one that's more like psychological horror.
Ooh.
I also had an idea for something that's kind of, I'm not sure if this is going to be a scenario or just a novel I will get out, possibly both though, which is sort of like an alien infested Jurassic Park in space with, you know, kind of the Thing type creatures.
That's amazing. And that's how my brain works too. I want to do something with like alien dinosaurs in space. Like
Absolutely.
you also had
Love
me at
that.
space opera. I'm here for that as well. Can we talk a little bit about the Kickstarter?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
But yeah, there will be a PDF tier. There'll be a tier with the published book in paperback. I don't know about a hardback. We'll see on the full length before we decide on that.
Sure.
And then there will be a tier with the cards, with the major arcana cards. I'm also considering maybe doing some posters of the art as like a limited tier, just because they look so amazing. So I might want some of those for myself as well.
Yeah.
We'll see. I got a great deal on the card printing, so we'll see how that goes. And that's pretty much, I just want to keep it mostly simple with this one.
Yep.
Any other, this extra stretch goals like adding more scenarios, adding music, that'd all be something that you get just with the PDF version, same as Cuticurium. I do have an add-on where you can get a discounted version of all my other games too, just to throw that out there.
I've heard folks do that before in the past and it works out well.
Now that the add-ons work for everyone on Kickstarter instead of just the beta ones.
Yep. You had mentioned the music earlier with Cuticurium, and I forgot to ask you, is it similar to the other game I've seen this with is like Alice is Missing? Does it help time the gameplay or is it more like mood setting?
Definitely mood setting. In the Cuticurium game, certain locations were very specific because you could get attachments to those locations. So we had tracks kind of for each location and some for wider areas. So in this game, I probably want to do tracks just for each of the adventures or each of the modules.
I really like that idea. I hope that makes it into the stretch
I
goal.
hope, yeah,
although I have no say, but I hope it makes it into stretch
Me neither,
goals.
but it was very fun to work with Yofi before.
The more I think about it, the more I think that sounds like a really cool idea. So I'm all for it.
Yeah.
It does.
Like I said, I was just listening to the same tracks while I was writing it, and it's like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
way before any of the people actually got to hear the full thing released.
Do you have a publisher? Are you self-publishing? How's that working for your game?
We're self-publishing. I do all the distribution and the fulfillment through IPR, Indie Press Revolution, and they've been absolutely wonderful for Cuticurium. They've done just an amazing job, and I already contacted them, and they said they're totally willing to do this one too.
Fantastic. And I know we talked about before we started recording, but I don't think we caught it on air. When is the Kickstarter going live, if you have that date?
Right. The Kickstarter should be going live, I believe, the first week in December, 9th or 10th of December, and planning to end around January 8th, 9th.
Okay. So you're going to go like 30 days-ish.
Yeah, just to dodge the New Year's and then Christmas, which is pretty much the exact same time I did for Cuticurium. So
is it really last year at this time?
Yeah, I'm kind of falling into like a yearly schedule.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, I mean, I'm a medical student, so I have to focus almost 90% of my time on studying for very, very tough exams. But this is my hobby, so all the rest of my time goes to designing these, which is very fun and very rewarding.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for joining me.
Yeah.
Before we wrap, I would love for you to remind folks who you are, where they can find you on the internets if you want to be found, and just remind them like where they can find the book or where they can find your games, Ulysses.
Yeah,
Ulysses Duckler again. My Twitter is impronounceable. I'm not going to try and do that one, but you can find all my information and all my games at US Duct Tape, itch.io. So it's an easy page to find all that stuff.
Perfect. Ewen?
Well, my main Twitter at the moment, I think, assuming I'm not misremembering, I did change it recently, but it's one space down. So that's, I guess, where you can find me. Like I say, the book is on Archive of Our Own under the username TF Taxonomist.
So thank you so much for joining us. You can find the link to the Kickstarter to change in our show notes, as well as the link to where you can find Ewan's book, and any other projects we've talked about will also be in the links, including their Twitter handles. So thank you again so much for listening, and please check out To Change, back it, and tell all of your friends.
Hello, it's Amber at the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening to Tabletop Crowd, and thank you so much to Kristin, also known as Kristin Is No Jedi on Twitter, for hosting Tabletop Crowd and keeping this show going. And also, thank you so much, dear listener, for sticking around as Tabletop Babble is getting its feet back under itself, aka Amber getting my feet back under me. Anyway, I should probably end this ending. Tabletop Babble is a part of the Geekspective podcast network. Go to geekspective.com to peruse all of the other podcast and podcast accessories for you to consume. Okay, thanks for listening again. I'll see you next episode. Bye-bye.